What's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you on Wednesday, June 4th, 2025. We got a big recruiting episode of the pod to get into for you guys today. And as you know, I'm coming to you from a fairly gloomy Long Beach, California, and things are heating up on the recruiting trail for the Ducks. We got two commitments to get into. We talked about Prince Tavizon on the last episode of the pod, and now we have another one to get into today. So make sure you stick around for the whole episode. We'll also look ahead to a new development along the offensive line for Oregon's recruiting efforts in the 2026 class, and a big, what's shaping up to be a pretty significant official visit weekend for Dan, Lanning, and the Ducks. So, all that said, thank you guys so much for being here. Glad to have you along for another episode of the pod. Whether you're listening to us wherever you get your podcasts or watching us on the ScoopDuck on 3 YouTube channel, I'm just glad to have you here. And if you are here on the YouTube channel, do me a quick favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. So, the main story of the day, the main story that we're going to be focusing on in today's episode is yet another 2027 commitment for the Ducks. And this was a big one. And it came less than 24 hours after San Diego Lincoln edge Prince Tavizon announced his commitment to the Ducks. You know who wanted to get in on the party? 2027 four-star Alabaster, Alabama, Thompson defensive lineman Cam Pritchett. Cam Pritchett decided to pull the trigger and announce his commitment to Oregon after taking his first visit to Oregon. And that, I think, is something that we're going to get into a little bit later here on the pod, is just the significance that one visit can have on any recruitment. We've seen it time and time again. The best example to this day for me seems to be the Kayvon Thibodeau recruitment. He was, of course, in the 2019 class out of Oaks Christian, was the number one player in the country, I believe, according to ESPN. So that was really one of the most notable recruitments in my career that I've covered, because he was the top player in the country and really kind of ignited a little bit more of Oregon's recruiting efforts in Southern California. But here we are 6 years later in 2025, and we're talking about one of the top players, someone who might be viewed as the very best defensive lineman in the entire state of Alabama. So we're going to go ahead and turn on some tape here so you guys can see what the Ducks are getting, the kind of player the Ducks are getting here in Cam Pritchett. And I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background on the newest member of Oregon's 2027 recruiting class. Cam Pritchett, right in that 6'2", 6'3" range at 250 pounds. Like I said, he's at Thompson High School in Alabaster, Alabama. He is rated a 4-star recruit and ranked the number 195 player in the On 300 rankings, the number 21 defensive lineman, and the number 4 prospect in the state of Alabama. This was a recruitment that moved pretty quickly. Oregon only offered him in April, and he was supposed to be coming out to Oregon. It was either for the spring game or for a game in April. For a practice in April, but there were some delays with his flights, and he ended up having to cancel the visit. But Oregon moved quickly to get another trip on the books, and now he came out to Eugene, and now he's in Oregon's 2027 class. So I think this is an awesome development for Oregon. I know that a lot of people would prefer probably that Oregon have some more momentum in the 2026 class, but I think that may not be far away, and we'll get to that in a little bit here later on in the show. And I talked with Charles Power, the director of scouting and rankings for On 3, to get a little bit more on Cam Pritchett. So I'm going to read from that story now. Cam Pritchett comes from a top high school program in the state of Alabama. Thompson, perennial state title contender, has won a ton of state championships. He's kind of next in line there, between 6'2" and 6'3", around 250 pounds. Had a good sophomore season, had 6 sacks, and is a guy who I think has really continued developing. He's a little bit younger for the class. Believe he turned 16 earlier in the spring. There's certainly room for continued development. He's already 250 pounds, so we've kind of viewed him as a fringe edge / D lineman type. Could ultimately see him becoming a D tackle just based off of where he's at from a size perspective now, and projecting weight gains and physical growth over the next 2 years. a very good player as a sophomore, active. He's been well coached, plays hard, physical, a guy that's going to offer some versatility, and it's going to be interesting to see where he ends up just from a size and positional perspective. A blue chip prospect from a top high school program in the state of Alabama, and a guy who I think can do some different things in Oregon's scheme. So when you're looking at the tape for Cam Pritchett, the versatility, I think, is certainly what you have to be excited about, because he moves really well for his size, and he's not small by any means, not a massive dude at 6'2", 6'3", 250. But I think when you look at him and evaluate the type of player that he is, you see that he's definitely got some room to add to his frame, seeing that he's only 250 pounds right now. Maybe this is a guy that ends up being like a little bit like a Brandon Dorless type for the Ducks. I think physically, at least, there's some similarities there in the frame. And this guy has 2 more seasons of high school football left. So if you hear me say that and think to yourself, well, Max Brandon Dorless was almost 300 pounds, that this guy's definitely got time to add some of his weight. So I see where Charles is coming from when he says he's kind of a fringe edge / D lineman. You love the fact that he's coming from the Southeast and plays against premier competition each and every week. And he also represents a growing presence for Oregon in the state of Alabama. Remember Naeem Offord? That's right, that 5-star plus cornerback that Oregon signed in the 25 class. He was from Birmingham, went to Parker High School, and did just about everything for that program. Is a guy that offers tremendous versatility as well. And maybe we see him get a little bit of some snaps this season as a nickel in Oregon's defense. That secondary is a completely new look secondary. And I know that Offord is one of the guys that, one of those true freshmen that has Oregon fans incredibly excited. So when we're looking a little bit more into this Cam Pritchett recruitment, I was able to get an interview with him about his commitment and just why he ended up choosing the Ducks. And I'm gonna try to pull that up now on my end, just so I can give you guys a little bit of some quotes, and just shed some light on this recruitment. He said that Oregon checks all the boxes for me, and he chose Oregon over some pretty stiff competition from other big time schools. Right, you're looking at programs like Clemson, Tennessee, Auburn, Ohio State, Florida State. I mean, this is basically everybody in the country wanted, and probably still wants, Cam Pritchett. So, like I said with the Tavizon commitment, when Justin and I were talking about that one earlier on this week, there's a long way to go. There's a long way to go, no doubt about it, for Oregon and Cam Pritchett to ultimately get across the finish line and secure a signature so that he will end up playing his college football at the U of O. But for Oregon, this is an awesome start with Tavizon and Pritchett. We know that the Ducks really prioritize defensive linemen. That's a premium position for sure. Having a defense that can get after the quarterback, a defensive front that can get after a quarterback, is really a foundational piece of a good defense. And there's been times where, when I've been covering Oregon in my career, where the Ducks just have not had a consistent pass rush. I think that you could probably make the case that was what was happening in 2022 for Oregon. And then it's only really gotten better from 2023 to 2024. Obviously, Mateo Uiagalelei led the Big Ten in sacks last year, and he's one of the best talents in the country, one of the most gifted players when it comes to getting after the quarterback. And I'm excited to see what the defensive line can do moving forward here as we look to the 2025 season. And other guys need to step up with Jordan Burks, Jamari Caldwell, and Derek Harmon all in the NFL now, right? Now you have to look to some younger guys. You have Mateo Uiagalelei as kind of the face of the group. Amari Washington's a guy that's there. Tion Gray, Terrence Green, Bear Alexander comes over from USC. So there's plenty of talent in that room and along the defensive line. Maybe not as much as experience as you'd hope for, ideally, but I think the fact that they only took Alexander really shows you the kind of confidence that Dan Lanning, Tony Tuioti, and Tosh Lupoi have in those guys up front. So just winding down the Pritchett analysis here, and then we'll get to a couple other topics on today's episode. What else can we say about Pritchett other than that he's a blue chipper from a talent-rich area? And I think that even though you want momentum in the 2026 class, momentum's momentum, even if it's in the 2027 class. And Oregon's got a major opportunity to build and then hopefully capitalize, right? If you're an Oregon fan, you want them to capitalize on a big month of official visitors. The Ducks will have a majority of their top targets in and out of Eugene throughout the month, with June 20th. That's right. June 20th is the weekend that you got to have circled on the calendar if you follow Oregon recruiting. That is the most notable weekend for official visits. And we're going to focus more and more on the 2026 class here throughout the month of June. So we're going to move on to our next topic. And we saw one of Oregon's top offensive line targets come off the board on Tuesday when 2026 San Francisco, California Archbishop Reardon offensive lineman Tommy Toffee committed to Cal. And that was a little bit of a surprise. I kind of caught wind of it earlier in the day on Tuesday, and I was kind of asking around with some other sources and connections about, hey, is this really, like, does this have legs to it? Are you hearing kind of some smoke with Cal? And it wasn't so much that was verified that Cal was really the team to beat in this recruitment. I mean, both myself and Justin had our predictions on Oregon for Toffee, and I know that Justin changed his before the announcement came out. But this was a guy that Oregon had really invested a lot of time and resources into. I know that he mentioned to me that Dan Lanning was the first head coach to go see him when coaches were able to hit the road. I believe that was in January. He's visited plenty of times. He was on campus for the Ohio State game, but this past weekend he took his official visit to Cal, and Cal's doing pretty good for Cal recruiting. I mean, we know the limitations that come with recruiting to Cal. Never really been viewed as a top tier college football program, but they've landed like 4 commits now in the last week or so, or maybe just the start of June. So they have the number 29 class the last time that I checked, and Toffee is undoubtedly the headliner. He's the best player in Northern California. So a great get for the Bears to land him here in June, fresh off of that official visit to Berkeley. He was supposed to visit Oregon this weekend for his official visit. I'll have to reach out and see if he still plans to take that visit, but probably stands to reason that that won't happen now that he's committed. So now we have to look at it. Where does Oregon go from here? Offensive line recruiting has been a hot topic over on the ScoopDuck message boards. Remember, if you guys haven't already, you got to come check us out at ScoopDuck.com. We got an incredibly active and engaged message board community. Join thousands of other Ducks fans talking about the Ducks, celebrating the wins, mourning the losses, all those good things. But case in point, offensive line recruiting has been a hot topic over on ScoopDuck lately, and it kind of feels like, you're not waving the white flag here, right? Nobody's doing that. You got just about 6 months, almost exactly, until the early signing period for the 2026 recruiting class. But based on some of the way these recruitments have kind of shaken out and the way that the cookie has crumbled, we can maybe say here in the 2026 class, it kind of feels like landing Emmanuel Ihetnicho is what is going to define whether or not this offensive line group is a success. He's obviously the highest rated guy that Oregon's still in on, but there's been a lot of dudes in this class that Oregon has prioritized and ultimately missed on. And I say that to, call it how it is. That's the reality of the situation we find ourselves in right now, but also not to say this one's not over or anything like that, but there is a very real possibility that some of these guys could flip to Oregon. And I say that because we saw 2 blue chippers flip to Alik Terry and the Ducks along the offensive line, maybe even 3 if you count Alai Kalaniuvalu, who had a crazy recruitment. He's since signed with BYU. That's a whole debacle. Committed to Oregon, flipped to BYU, flipped back to Oregon, and then signed with BYU. So I don't know if you want to use that to show that Alik Terry can flip guys, but Zach Staskowski flipped from Washington last cycle, and so did Douglas Utu, flipped from Tennessee last cycle, one of the best offensive linemen in the country out of Bishop Gorman. So we've seen Alik Terry do it before, but I think based on the success that Oregon has had as a program recruiting and the success that they've had along the offensive line, Josh Connerly just got taken as a first-round pick by the Commanders in this year's draft. You probably expect them to do a little bit better, at least in this cycle specifically, along the offensive line here. So Obviously, you have some big time guys that came in from the portal: Isaiah World, Alex Harkey, Emmanuel Pregnon from USC. That's all well and good, but I know a lot of Oregon fans seem to be concerned right now with just the state of offensive line recruiting, because you're here in June and you don't have any offensive linemen committed to you. Like we just talked about, Tommy Tofi committed to Cal, Jackson Cantwell committed to Miami, Grant Wise committed to Clemson, a big time interior guy out there in the state of Florida. Um, and it's just not necessarily where you want to be. So that said, let's get back to some of these guys that the Oregon is still actively recruiting. That's Emmanuel Ihenacho, just started his official visits to LSU this past weekend, and it looks like he's also going to check out Oregon, Auburn, and Penn State. So those are the kind of the main group that we're watching right now. Oregon's scheduled to get his last official visit on that big June 20th weekend. He's going to take a little over a month to make his college decision, with a commitment coming on August 5th. I mean, that's a 5-star plus guy. When Cantwell was off the board to Miami, Ihenacho quickly shot to the top of Oregon's board. And then other than him, you're looking at a guy like Jax Tanner, an interior guy from the state of Idaho. He takes his official visit to Oregon this weekend, but I have a hard time right now placing a prediction to Oregon. I think Oregon's probably solidly no worse than third in that recruitment. He just took his official visit to Michigan. He is of LDS faith, and BYU is in the mix here. He plans to take a mission trip after graduation, so he's kind of really a 2028 guy, but that's a good player. I flew out to Utah, flew out to Salt Lake City to see him in the Under Armour camp, and that dude barely lost any reps. And I think the only time he really did lose was going against Oregon commit Viliami Mawala, who is an absolute hoss in the middle. That dude dominated all day. But Jax Tanner's a great player. Also, really likes Jackson Powers Johnson and kind of what Oregon was able to do for him and his development. So I still give Oregon a shot in that recruitment for Jax Tanner without a doubt. But I think that BYU kind of has the lead right now. Family in Utah. His dad played there. He's got some brothers that are either already there or coming back from their mission trips and are going to play for Kalani Sitake. So Tanner's a big name to watch as well. You have Kelvin Obot, the Idaho offensive lineman, one of the highest rated guys in the country. He's supposed to take an official visit to Oregon later on this month. And I think he got things going with Utah for his first official visit. So you got Oregon battling Utah, Michigan, and Nebraska for Kelvin Obot, who is right there on the Oregon-Idaho border, more or less, out there in Fruitland. So Oregon's got the distance on their side here with Obot, which is not the case for Ihenacho, but it is the case for Jax Tanner, too. You got some distance on your side there, even though BYU is kind of the main threat, but a West Coast, Western region guy. And then there's a newer guy in Kaloy Kelly. He is an interior offensive lineman from Farrington High School out there on the islands in Honolulu. And if Farrington sounds familiar, it's because it should. That's where Iapani Pancho Lalaulu played his high school football, and he's been playing pretty good for the Ducks, right? I think that he has developed really nicely. He's been getting some love over the offseason as one of the best returning interior guys. I think PFF was the last outlet to show him some love. But Kaloy Kelly, I think, is a little bit more of a realistic ad, strictly looking at the competition that the Ducks are recruiting against. I think that with him taking his first official to Michigan State, you also have Cal in the mix there. He's taking an OV to Cal, I think, this weekend. And then an Oregon OV is in the works with Hawaii, Manoa also in the mix there. So I think with Alik Terry's ties on the islands, right? You remember that he coached at Hawaii before he returned to Oregon. That was the first school that gave him a shot with his own room. I think that you definitely can see Oregon becoming a major contender for Kaloy Kelly. Last little topic on today's episode. Thanks so much for being here. We're talking Oregon recruiting here in the 2026 and 2027 classes. Let's shift our focus strictly to 2026 with official visits coming this weekend. Oregon's starting off their official visits. Maybe I'll have an episode tomorrow out with J-Hop, just kind of taking a closer look at all of these guys. But some of the more significant news: 5-star cornerback Brandon Arrington from the San Diego area, Spring Valley, California, Mount Miguel High School. He was scheduled to take his official visit to Oregon, I believe, on that last official visit weekend in late June 20th. But he has decided to move up his official visit to Oregon to this weekend. And a significant development: Texas A&M, one of his other finalists, just landed a commitment from Cameron Hamill out of Arizona, Desert Edge High School in Goodyear. So I don't know. I think if you're kind of reading between the lines here, you see Texas A&M landing one of their top guys. You see one of Oregon's top targets returning to campus, kind of shifting his official visit schedule. He's also got USC and Alabama in the mix. I think that Oregon's been in a pretty good spot for Brandon Arrington for a while, but that's a guy that holds his cards very close to the vest. So it's been hard to see who's really creating separation there, but I think Oregon's got a great chance to do that this weekend. One more guy we have to talk about. We'll do two more. How about two more? One more guy we have to talk about on today's episode. How about Tyler Atkinson? Tyler Atkinson, the number one linebacker in the 2026 class, On3 Industry, 5-star recruit out of Georgia, Grayson High School. He's taking an official visit to Oregon this weekend. That news broke this morning from On3's Hayes Fawcett. He's only taken one official visit so far, and it looks like it went pretty well out there to Death Valley to see Dabo Swinney and the Tigers over at Clemson. But it seems like this is the only one that is on the books right now on the schedule, but maybe he's just kind of taking things week by week. No decision timeline, no commitment date for Tyler Atkinson. But I mean, I think this guy has to be your most important visitor of the weekend. You're also going to have Richard Wesley back on campus, first time since he decommitted. The last time he was on campus, he did commit, which is a bizarre storyline in and of itself. But if we're talking about Tyler Atkinson, this is Oregon's top linebacker target. He's the number one linebacker, I should say, in the country for a reason. I mean, I was talking to someone internally and they were telling me, hey, this isn't a linebacker. This is a linebacker that doesn't come around very often. I think it's kind of in that long shot kind of tier for Oregon right now. He did visit for spring ball. Like he saw spring practice in Eugene earlier on in March, I think. So it's nice that you're going to be able to get him back on campus for sure. This is a guy that has a relationship with Dan Lanning, I think, going back to 7th or 8th grade. So we haven't really seen Lanning lean into those Georgia connections super heavily, maybe not as much as people expected. I know when he first got hired and guys were hitting the portal from Georgia, a lot of questions came out. Oh, is Oregon going to get this guy? How about this Bulldog that just entered the portal? But Atkinson and that Lanning connection could be something that really proves to be special and helps the Ducks make up some ground here. So Oregon's battling Clemson, like we just talked about. Ohio State's in the mix there. Georgia's in the mix there. USC's in the mix. But maybe we'll see if Oregon getting an earlier visit here, kind of earlier in the month, could end up being a positive. That's been something that we've been kind of discussing over on the message boards as well. Typically, historically, you've seen a later official visit be viewed as something that's more favorable for a program. But now a lot of programs across the country are kind of hosting big official visit weekends earlier on in the cycle or earlier on in the summer, late spring, and it's resulting in commitments. I mean, look at what Washington's doing. They got Derek Coleman-Bruce in the fold, Cody Green in the fold. I think they just got Gavin Day in the fold. And then now Cal had a big official visit weekend, and they got Nehemiah Talona, a De La Salle defensive lineman. He committed there. Oregon was kind of recruiting him for a while. And then Tommy Tofi got in the fold as well. So I think Oregon's got a major opportunity with Tyler Atkinson this weekend, and he is certainly one that you have to watch. Last guy we're going to talk about here is Calvin Russell. Let's go out to the state of Florida, to the Sunshine State. The Miami Northwestern wide receiver is going to be returning to Eugene. Pretty quick turnaround. He was on campus last month for an unofficial visit, and I talked about it over the weekend on ScoopDuck. This is why you want to be at ScoopDuck. Subscribe to ScoopDuck. I had spoke to a source over the weekend and was kind of told, like, hey, Oregon's going to get an OV from Calvin Russell and Messiah Hampton. I didn't have dates that I was able to get, unfortunately, but I was, told the subs, told the readers over there, hey, keep an eye on these two guys, Messiah Hampton and Calvin Russell. You're going to get official visits from both of them. And then Hayes Fawcett reported the news that Russell is going to be in Eugene this weekend. That's the plan for his official visit. Definitely think Oregon has some ground to make up there. Sounds like they're battling Miami, Florida, Syracuse as well. And I think Syracuse being in the mix here is notable because Ross Douglas was at Syracuse. Now he's at Oregon. And I think he's a main reason that Oregon has a shot in this recruitment. So Calvin Russell is going to be a big one to watch. He's, 6'5", 190, 200 pounds. Won a state title over there with Teddy Bridgewater at Miami Northwestern last season. Incredibly gifted receiver. And then you also have to keep an eye out for Messiah Hampton. Haven't been able to confirm a date for him, but he's coming off the board to make his college commitment on June 13th. Sounds like Oregon's battling Miami as well as Syracuse there, with Messiah Hampton being the number one prospect in the state of New York. So those are kind of some of the early names you have to watch out for Oregon's official visits this weekend. A reminder to sign up for the ScoopDuck newsletter if you haven't already. I try to send that every day or 5 to 6 days a week if I can. And that's where you can kind of keep up to date with all the latest news over at ScoopDuck. But that'll do it for me here on this episode. You can find me anywhere at Torres Sports on social media. Subscribe to the ScoopDuck on 3 YouTube channel. Come and see us at scoopduck.com and share the Ducks Dish podcast. But until next time, thank you guys so much for tuning in.